Hello, welcome to Julie Reads Her Bookshelf. I'm Julie, and for those of you who are new to this channel, this is a channel where I read through all of the books on my bookshelf until we reach zero. And sorry I've been away for a while. I had a holiday over the course of April and I was away for that whole month. And I got back in May, but actually since the start of May, and now it's the start of June, I've just been having issues trying to find enough daylight hours. It's now winter in Australia and I work during the day, so it's been pretty difficult just finding a free weekend where I can film during the day. And while I was in China, I actually didn't get that much reading done. There are some holidays where you read a lot, and there are some holidays where you don't get much reading done at all because of just being on the go all the time. And one of the things I was doing while I was in China was actually going to a pottery boot camp. So one of my hobbies outside of reading is making pottery. And I went to a place called Jingdezhen in China, which is kind of the porcelain central of planet Earth. It is the place where pottery was invented, and the whole town lives and breathes pottery. So while I was there, I was pretty much working from 9:30 a.m. till usually 9:30 p.m. just practicing pottery, throwing things on the wheel, working with porcelain. And it was strangely a really great life. It was simultaneously exhausting because I was doing a lot of physical work, and I normally work as a lawyer, so I don't really I'm very much coming from a knowledge worker type of background. But it was also really relaxing because working with your hands all the time, you're just really present and you're really kind of paying attention to what you're making. You're paying attention to the feeling of clay under your hands. So it was a wonderful experience, but all of that is to say that in amongst all of that throwing and making and being a creative, I hadn't had much time to read at all. So I took one book to China with me, A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, and I actually took the Kindle version of this book. So before I left, I was about halfway through this book. And after I got back from China, I was only about 200 pages more progressed than when I left. So it took me a while. But this was my pick way back during March of the Mammoth for my kind of Mammoth of the Year. But it's also a book that fits in with my reading theme of the year. So if you are new here, every year I have a reading theme. And I read predominantly, but not exclusively around a particular theme to plug gaps in my reading. So this year, my reading theme of the year is BRICS, and that is literature from the countries of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So A Suitable Boy obviously meets the brief, as it is a book written by an Indian author and very much about Indian history and a snapshot of Indian life at a particular point in time. So I really wanted to talk about this book because I had a wonderful time, notwithstanding the fact that it took me about 2 months to finish it. It was absolutely wonderful, and I'm fairly certain this is going to be one of my favorite books of the year. There is no getting around the fact that this book is massive. So my copy clocks in at, I think, just over 1,500 pages. Yeah, about 1,470, which is about the length of my copy of War and Peace, although I don't know about exact word count. And in a way, I see a lot of similarities between this book and War and Peace. They are both books of historic fiction that follow the lives of a number of families through a particular turbulent phase of a particular country's history. So War and Peace is obviously dealing with the Napoleonic Wars within Russia, and A Suitable Boy is actually set in India, kind of in the early days of independence in the 1950s. And at its heart, it's a story about a girl called Lata, who is a young woman pressured by her mother to marry a suitable boy. And we get that right at the first chapter. That's sort of the setup of the book. And that storyline follows through right until the end of the book. But the book is about so much more than that. It's about really three families who are all kind of related through in-laws and their experience of the early days of India's independence. And really, I was so surprised at the scale of this book. This book is not just about one girl's search for marriage. It's about religious tensions. It's about political reform. There's a lot in there actually about kind of land reform and trying to shake off the caste system, which is an issue that India continues to have problems with. And it's about class divisions, ethnic tensions, and there's actually a legal case in there about a set of land reforms that one of the characters in the book is trying to introduce. And so one of the things I really enjoyed about this book was just how much it goes into the politics and land reforms. I know it sounds a little bit dry, but it's central to the plot line, and the lives of several families in this book revolve around these reforms that are about to come in and really change their lives, change their background. And as a lawyer, I got to one of the scenes where this book goes into a court case about these land reforms and whether or not they're constitutional. And the way that Vikram Seth writes about that courtroom scene and the tension between the senior counsels, between the senior counsel and the junior counsels on the case, and the vibes between the judges, where some of the judges are more respected than others, it was so spot on in terms of my own experience of court, even in today's Australia, that I actually had to look up whether he was a lawyer, and lo and behold, he was. And these types of political and legal plot lines are really balanced against the lighter aspects of family life, of romance, and some pretty passionate kind of relationships within this book, as well as some juicy scandals. At the end of this book, there is a particular tragedy involving several of the main characters, and that really forces you to revisit your opinion about some of the characters that you respect and liked throughout the novel. And by the end of the book, Lata does choose a boy, but whether or not that boy is a suitable boy, and that interesting tension between a love marriage and an arranged marriage is something that's really left a little bit ambiguous. I feel like Vikram Seth doesn't give you his opinion about whether she's ended up with the right person. He kind of leaves it a little bit open to your own judgment as a reader as to whether she made the right choice in terms of her husband. And a suitable boy, ultimately, I really do recommend if you're kind of a bit on the fence about going into it, because it is such a large book. I would say that it has all the hallmarks of a great tome. It has this kind of multi-generational saga, there's complex characters, there's a rich historic setting, and there's romance, there's violence, there's fighting, there's politics and justice, and above all, it has this element of timelessness. The themes and issues in this book are not specific to India in the 1950s. A lot of them remain relevant today, both to India, but also to the rest of the world. This kind of religious tensions, the role that politics play in bringing out divisions within the community. These are important problems that we continue to struggle with in the world in 2025. And indeed, when I was finishing this book, the tensions between India and Pakistan were also kind of picking up, and that is reflected in the plot of the book as well. So I had that kind of moment where I was reading through the tensions within the book between Muslim and Hindu communities, between India and Pakistan, and then I was seeing that play out in real life, even 70 years later. And the last thing I want to mention about this book is just the fantastic cast of female characters. And I say female characters specifically because I do have this problem of reading timeless classics and finding the female characters within them really, really flat. And I think that's a common problem when you read a lot of male writers who just don't seem to ever be able to empathize enough with 50% of the population to write a memorable female character that doesn't just exist in relation to the male protagonist. But this book does the opposite. This book has just a number of really nuanced, complex female characters who make decisions based on just a number of factors that feel really real to you, and they feel like real characters that you know you could meet on the street, and they are not predictable. They don't exist just to prop up the male protagonist. In fact, they are very much central to the book. And so that's one of the things I really loved about this book, and I thought Vikram Seth did an absolutely phenomenal job just creating these three families that are so adorable and endearing. So if you are thinking about reading this book, I absolutely recommend going into it. Like I said, it took me 2 months, but it's actually quite a fast-paced book. So I don't actually think that if you were on a bit of a roll with your reading that it would take you very long at all. Actually, it's the kind of book you could get through in about 2 weeks, I reckon. For me, obviously, I was traveling, I was making ceramics, so my mind was elsewhere, but I did get through this book at a really enjoyable pace for me. I wanted to end by talking about another book that I read just before my holiday that I really, really enjoyed, and it left a really deep impression on me. Now, as many of you know, I am on a kind of low buy, book buying ban type situation until I get through all of the unread books behind me. But I did need a little bit of variety to kind of keep things fresh and to keep my motivations up as we head into the third year now of this project. So I went to the local library and I got out a book called East West Street by Philip Sands. This author was introduced to me by a friend of mine who works in international law, and actually Philip Sands is a UK-based barrister who practices in international law. Specifically, he's an expert on genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity. So this book is kind of a history of the origins of these concepts within international law, but also a personal history. So the book follows the lives of four men: Hersch Lauterpacht, Raphael Lemkin, Hans Frank, and the author's own grandfather. And Lauterpacht and Lemkin were, for anyone who studied international law, the forefathers of concepts such as crimes against humanity and genocide. And actually those two concepts didn't exist until the aftermath of the Second World War, where the legal community and the victims of the conduct of the Nazis were really trying to find the language to describe the crime that had happened. And Hans Frank was obviously the perpetrator. He was a member of the Nazi Party, and he was at the time the kind of ruler of Poland, what was then Poland. And the book follows the path of all of these men, Lauterpacht and Lemkin, in terms of their path in fleeing persecution to the US and to the UK respectively, and Hans Frank as he rose to power after Germany took over the area that is now Poland and the western part of Ukraine. And then their fortunes reversed after the war, where Lauterpacht and Lemkin really played a critical role in the prosecution of Hans Frank in the Nuremberg trials. The book works on several levels. It's a gripping read. It's meticulously researched about the Second World War, but also its aftermath from the perspective of the development of international law. It also makes some really interesting observations about the tension between crimes against humanity, which is very much focused on the suffering of individuals, versus a crime like genocide, which is very much based around the suffering of a group. And that is very, very controversial in international law, and it remains controversial today. We don't really think of genocide as this kind of highly controversial crime because, quite frankly, you know it when you see it. There are absolutely conduct by various governments which are aimed at erasing ethnicities, erasing entire peoples off the face of this planet. But at the same time, criminalizing that conduct has always remained controversial for the reason that by criminalizing the erasure of a group, you actually play up the kind of group identities that lead to these crimes in the first place. So beyond that kind of tension between the individual and the group, it's also a personal history because Philip Sands' grandfather fled the same area of the western part of Ukraine that Lemkin and Lauterpacht came from, except his grandfather went to Paris, and then from Paris his mum then married a British person, which is how he came to be primarily based in the UK and practicing law there. That kind of mixture of personal history and history at large seems to be a real trend within this type of nonfiction recently, but this one I think is particularly well done, and reading it kind of made me, well, first of all, it was very, very touching to read kind of the resilience and the strength of all of these characters in surviving World War II, but also coming back and confronting the perpetrators. But it's also made me realize that I know very little about my own family and the history of my grandmother, who lived in China all her life, but she's now 90 and she's seeing some pretty remarkable things in that country too. So it's reminded me to ask her a little bit about her life while I was there visiting as well. And that's all from me. What do you think? Have you read either of these books? And if so, what do you think about them? I plan on coming back soon, I hope. With winter, having enough daylight hours to make these videos is always a bit of a struggle, but I do want to talk a little bit about what I've been reading in kind of May and also June, and also my reading plans for the second half of the year. So hopefully we will see each other very soon. Bye.